Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most elaborately rule-bound, card-carrying, glove-peeling decades in American history. The 1920s, when women got the right to vote and immediately had to figure out which corner of their calling card to fold to signal congratulations. Not the flapper posters. Not the jazz-soaked movie version with the feather boa and the carefree shimmy. The real version, where Emily Post filled nearly 700 pages deciding whether your nail varnish was morally suspect and whether you'd overstayed a visit by 2 minutes. If wonderfully precise, quietly unhinged historical detail is your sort of thing, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. And a warm thanks to the listener who put tonight's subject in my hands. Wherever you've settled in right now, I hope you're nowhere near a dinner table. Since touching up your lipstick at 1 was apparently a moral emergency, leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and the hour showing on your clock. Somewhere out there it has quietly slid past 5 a, and I admire that level of dedication to bedtime history. Dim the lights, turn on a fan, get comfortable, and maybe pull on a glove, just the right one, and only part way, because the left stays folded at the wrist until further notice. Have you ever wondered what it actually took to leave the house as a woman in 1920s? America, not conceptually, but item by item, minute by minute. Did you know a visiting card, roughly the size of a playing card, could communicate at least 5 distinct social messages, depending on which corner you bent? What happens when your neighbors are legally sharing your telephone line, and you've just said something regrettable about the hostess on Maple Street? Could you survive a formal dinner where putting your gloves on the table was the social equivalent of standing on a chair? Why did painted fingernails carry roughly the same moral reputation as a wanted poster? The rouge? Did you apply it where it showed, or where it technically didn't? And seriously, did anyone actually do the Charleston, or was everyone just pretending they hadn't heard of it? Congratulations. You've just woken up in New York, 1923. Your hat is already judging you. Your calling cards are in a small silver case by the door, and somewhere across town, Emily Post is writing a sentence that will personally apply to something you're about to do wrong. Good luck. You are not allowed to leave the house yet, not because the door is locked, but because you are not finished. You have a hat to pin, gloves to find, a card case to refill, and a face to arrange into something the street will approve of. Stepping outside in 1922 is not a casual act. It is a small public appearance, and the public has standards, several hundred pages of them. Before your shoe touches the sidewalk, you have to pass an inspection no one is technically conducting. Let's start with the hat. The cloche sits low on your forehead, bell-shaped and close to the skull, and it has strong opinions about where it lives. Too far back and you look informal. Too far forward and you look theatrical. It wants to sit just above your eyebrows, which is exactly where it will spend the next 6 hours quietly pressing into your scalp. You will not adjust it in public. You will not complain about it. You will wear it because a woman seen outdoors without a hat is assumed to be in distress, exercising, or, worst of all, common. These are 3 separate categories. The hat does not distinguish between them. Now the gloves. You own kid gloves, fine ones, pale, close-fitted, and slightly self-important about it, and they cost somewhere between $2 and $5, which is not nothing. They fit tightly because they're supposed to, and pulling them on requires the focused patience of someone diffusing a small device. The rule is simple. Gloves on before you leave, gloves on until you sit at the table, right glove off when the food arrives, left glove folded down at the wrist and never, under any circumstances, placed on the table. The table has not done anything to deserve that. The gloves themselves seem aware of the stakes. They resist slightly at the knuckle, as if checking whether you're really committed to going out. The face is where things get complicated. You are wearing cosmetics. Of course you are. By 1922, the question isn't whether, but how much, and more precisely, how detectable. The rule is not don't wear rouge. The rule is don't wear rouge that is visible as rouge. The goal is to look as though you woke up like this, dewy and slightly flushed, which requires approximately 40 minutes of work to achieve convincingly. The effect you're after is seamless, invisible, and entirely unconvincing to anyone who has done the same 40 minutes themselves. A woman named Agnes, the kind of neighbor who has already been watching your front door for 20 minutes, will know if you got it wrong. She won't say anything. She'll just tilt her head 1.5 degrees, which in 1922 communicates a complete essay. Your card case is full. Each card is 3 by 1.5 inches, engraved, never printed, because printed cards are for people who don't know better. Your name reads Mrs. John Hartwell, not Mrs. Clara Hartwell, not Clara, Mrs. John Hartwell, because your first name on a formal card marks you immediately as foreign, lower class, or simply uninformed about how names work in polite society. The card knows whose wife you are. You are in there somewhere. The corners of some cards are folded. Upper right, which means you delivered this personally. Lower left, which means congratulations. It's a code, and like all codes, it's most useful to the people who already know it and slightly baffling to everyone else. By 1922, the system is already fading at the edges, but nobody's officially announced that yet, so you keep folding. You check yourself in the hallway mirror, hat level, gloves smooth, face appropriately, not a face, card case latched. You look like someone who has read all the relevant chapters and retained the material. The door opens. The street is waiting, unhurried and absolutely ready to form an opinion. You keep a small case of cards, and the cards are you. Each one is engraved, never printed, measuring 3 inches by 1.5, and each one carries your name in a form you did not choose. If you are married, the card reads Mrs. John Smith, not your first name, his. Your own first name on a card is an error, the kind that tells a stranger something about your breeding before you have said a word. You carry these cards everywhere, and you are judged by their accuracy. Let's talk about quantity. You leave no more than 3 cards per household, 1 of your own, 2 of your husband's. This is not a suggestion. The 2 of his are for the husband and wife of the house, since his card covers both, and yours covers only you, and everyone already knew that. If there are adult daughters in residence, the calculus shifts. You do the math at the door, cards fanned in your hand like a very formal poker hand with 0 upside. The corners matter. Folding the upper right corner of your card means you came in person. Folding the lower left means congratulations. There are other folds for condolences, for farewell, for reasons lost to time. By 1922, Emily Post notes this code is already fading. You fold the corner anyway, because Mrs. Eleanor Marsh on the 3rd floor definitely still knows what it means, and Mrs. Eleanor Marsh is not someone you want to get wrong. Now, the visit itself. A first formal call lasts 15 to 30 minutes, not 14. 17 is fine, 12 is a statement. The hostess, meanwhile, is operating under her own constraint. She cannot stand, cannot drift toward the fireplace until 15 minutes have passed. The fireplace is the signal. When she rises and moves toward it, the visit is over, and you both pretend this is not a choreographed dismissal performed in a sitting room in front of good china. It is basically a parking meter, except the fine for overstaying is your entire social reputation. A maid answers the door. You hand her your cards. If the hostess is not at home, genuinely absent, or performing absence, which are socially identical, you leave the cards and go. If her children answer instead of the maid, etiquette is firm. Do not hand the cards to a child. This is described in Post's 1922 edition with the same gravity used to discuss funerals. Handing your cards to a child is almost as bad as leaving them on the hall table yourself. The hall table is for hats and keys and people who don't know any better. This is where a woman named Mrs. Clara Devereux enters the picture. Mrs. Clara Devereux has called on you twice this season and left her cards correctly both times. Upper right corner folded, precise count, handed to your maid with the small nod that signals she has done this before. She is meticulous, composed, and entirely uninterested in being ignored. You have not returned the call. You have 3 weeks before this becomes an irretrievable social debt, the kind that accumulates interest not in dollars but in whispers. Mrs. Clara Devereux's card sits on your tray. It does not say anything. It doesn't need to. The card system runs on formal introductions and reciprocal obligation, except the introduction is a piece of engraved cardstock and you fold the corner to mean things. Declining to return a call is not neutrality. It is a message, delivered in the language of not showing up, which everyone in 1922 reads fluently. You add Mrs. Clara Devereux to your mental calendar. Tuesday, perhaps. No more than 20 minutes. You will let her fireplace move you out at 19. You arrive at a house you intend to call upon, and before anything else, there is arithmetic. You will leave no more than 3 cards here, 1 of yours and 2 of your husband's, 1 for the lady of the house and 1 for the gentleman. Leave too many and you look eager. leave too few, and you have slighted someone. You stand at the door doing sums in your head while holding a small stack of engraved cardboard. The household will notice what you left and what you didn't. The cards themselves are 3 by 1.5 inches, engraved, never printed, because printed cards announce that you've given up, and your name appears on them as Mrs. John Smith, your husband's full given name, not yours, not Mrs. Mary Smith, not Mary Smith, Mrs. John Smith. If your own first name appears on that card, etiquette's various authorities will agree across multiple published editions that you have revealed yourself as either foreign, lower class, or simply uninformed. The card has done its damage before anyone has opened the door. You're admitted. A maid takes your wrap. There is a clock on the mantelpiece that you will be watching for the next 15 minutes without appearing to watch it. Emily Post's 1922 edition, 692 pages, first of 10, is specific on the timing. A first formal call lasts 15 to 30 minutes. You may leave at 17 without offence. You may not leave at 14. The hostess, for her part, cannot stand and drift toward the fireplace until you've been there at least 15 minutes. That drift is the signal, universally understood, that the visit is concluding, so you are both performing a kind of choreography, where neither of you acknowledges the choreography exists. Overstaying is worse than not calling at all. This sounds like an exaggeration. It is not an exaggeration. Post says it plainly. The woman who sits for 45 minutes in someone's parlor has committed a social injury that the woman who never came has not. The woman who never came left a small debt. The woman who overstayed left a grievance. Debts can be repaid. Grievances are archived. Mrs. Pauline Ashworth, who arrives at 12 past and is still seated at 12:40 discussing her sister-in-law's curtains, does not realize she has crossed a line. She is still talking. A side table holds a small bowl of salted almonds. The almonds have been there since 11, and they are tired of the room. So is the hostess, who cannot stand up yet, who sits with her hands folded, patient, still, and quietly furious, watching Mrs. Ashworth watch nothing in particular and say everything she has already said in 3 different arrangements of words. And yet the rules don't stop at timing. There is also the question of what you do with the cards when no one answers the door. If the household is out, you leave your cards on the hall table, turned down in one corner, upper right if the visit was personal. You do not hand them to the children if a child answers. Handing your calling card to a child is, in the recorded opinion of multiple etiquette authorities, nearly as bad as setting it on the table yourself. The child will lose it. The table will hold it indefinitely. Neither outcome counts as a proper call. Of course, the corner folding code, upper right for a personal visit, lower left for congratulations, is already fading by the time Post publishes. The women who know it know it. The women who don't have been folding corners for reasons they can't entirely articulate. It is, in some households, the equivalent of a firm handshake. Still performed, no longer fully passed. The card arrives. The corner is folded. Someone places it in a silver dish by the door. The silver dish contains 6 cards from people whose corners mean different things to no one living in that house. You owe a return call within a week, in some circles within 3 days. The obligation doesn't announce itself. It simply accumulates quietly until the relationship either resolves or expires. The card sits in the silver dish by the door. Someone placed it there in good faith, corners folded, count correct. The dish holds 5 others just like it. The arithmetic continues. You learn to fold your cards, and the folds mean things. A turned-down upper right corner says you came in person. A folded lower left corner offers congratulations. There is a fold for condolence, a fold for a farewell before travel, a fold for nearly every reason a person might appear at a door. You are expected to know all of them, and to read them correctly when they appear on cards left for you. It is a code written in creased cardboard, and fewer people every year still remember how to read it. By 1922, the corner folding system is already fading, which is a little like receiving a fax in 2009, technically operational, technically respected, but increasingly the project of someone who has not looked out a window recently. The younger women skip the folds entirely. The older women notice. Nobody says anything directly, because this is 1923, and saying something directly is its own kind of vulgarity. Let's talk about what the card cannot say. It cannot say you are unhappy. It cannot say the visit was an obligation and you timed it with the small clock on your mantelpiece because you'd been told 17 minutes was acceptable and you were not going 1 second over. It cannot say you have left 3 cards at this household in 2 months and received exactly 0 in return, which is, by the social ledger, a debt unpaid and a message delivered. The card says only your husband's name and your shared address. It says it in copperplate. It says it with tremendous composure. Henrietta Marsh, brisk, thorough, and faintly mechanical about the whole enterprise, folds the lower left corner before she's even back in her car. Condolences for the Walcott Spaniel. She heard about it Thursday. The fold is small, the crease is sharp. She does not own the Spaniel any feelings, but she owns the Walcotts a fold, and so here it is. The card and call ritual was never fully alive in American cities the way it had been in English drawing rooms. It arrived on a boat, got unpacked, got practiced, and was almost immediately wrong for the context. New York moves too fast. Chicago is indifferent. Los Angeles hasn't decided what it is yet, and yet the etiquette manuals insist and women purchase the cards anyway, and the ritual continues, slightly embarrassed about itself. The card survives longest in the cities that most want to prove they have arrived. In those households, it is less a social tool and more an artifact of intent. You are demonstrating that you know what cards are for. You are demonstrating that your household observes the forms. There are still silver dishes by the front door in certain parlors across Chicago and Philadelphia, and every card that lands in them says exactly the same thing. We know how to do this. And yet, across town, someone younger is not leaving cards at all. She is telephoning. She is appearing unannounced and staying 40 minutes and not folding anything. She is the reason the etiquette manuals are on their 3rd edition. She keeps creating new emergencies for Emily Post to address in calm, measured prose that barely conceals what is essentially deep alarm. Your own cards sit in a small silver case in your bag, next to your gloves and the handkerchief you never use but always carry. The case was a wedding gift. The cards inside have your husband's name on them. The folds you make are precise and quickly disappearing from general literacy, like a punctuation mark nobody teaches anymore. You make them anyway. It costs nothing to be correct, and correctness, in 1923, is its own kind of currency, one that doesn't crash, doesn't fluctuate, and doesn't require a bank. You sit down for a first formal call, and a clock you cannot see begins to run. The visit must last at least 15 minutes and no more than 30. Leave too early and you have insulted the hostess. Stay past 30 and you have done something worse than rudeness. You have revealed that you cannot read a room. There is no timer on the mantel, no signal you are allowed to ask for. You simply have to know, in your body, when 15 minutes have passed and when 29 are nearly gone. Emily Post is very clear on the 17-minute mark. Leaving at 17 is fine. Leaving at 14 is not. The difference is 400 seconds. And no, there is no rubric for distinguishing them from across a settee. You are simply expected to have developed a finely calibrated internal metronome, the way some people develop a sense of direction or a feel for parallel parking. You have not. You are counting your own pulse. The hostess has her own problem. She is forbidden from standing and walking toward the fireplace until at least 15 minutes have elapsed. The fireplace walk is the signal. Everyone knows it. The moment her skirt clears the chair, you pick up your gloves and move toward the door. But she cannot do it too soon, and you cannot respond too slowly. It's the same 12 seconds of silent choreography, enacted in parlors across every American city in 1922, performed between 2 people who are both pretending they have no idea what's happening. Let's talk about the gloves. You are wearing them when you arrive. You keep them on for the duration of the call. You do not drape them over the armrest. You do not set them in your lap in a way that suggests you might be considering removing them. The gloves stay where gloves belong, which is on your hands, expressing nothing. A woman named Dorothy Fenn sits across from you. She is your hostess, pleasant, watchful, and occupying exactly the correct amount of space in her own chair. She received your card last week, left correctly with her maid. Dorothy has a small dog that keeps sniffing your ankle. Dorothy does not acknowledge the dog. You do not acknowledge the dog. The dog has formed its own opinion of this visit and keeps it to itself. The conversation runs through the approved channels. Weather, a mutual acquaintance, perhaps something vague about a concert or a lecture, nothing so specific that it requires a follow-up meeting to resolve. You cannot stay on one topic long enough to develop a real position on it, because that would require more time than the visit allows. The result is a kind of conversational watercolour, present, technically correct, and thoroughly without depth. By 20 minutes, you have covered the weather twice and the acquaintance once, and neither of you has said anything you'll remember by Friday. At some point, Dorothy stands. She moves toward the fireplace with an expression of complete neutrality, as though she has simply remembered something pleasant about the mantelpiece. You rise, you locate your hat, you make 3 statements of appreciation that are not quite the same statement, and you move toward the door at a pace that communicates ease without dragging. The timing here matters. A rushed exit suggests guilt. A slow one suggests you didn't see the signal. Dorothy walks you to the threshold and no further. The door closes. The visit is over. You lasted 21 minutes. You have no way of knowing if this was correct. You are the hostess now, and you have the opposite problem. A caller has arrived, and you must end the visit without ever saying that it is ending. The signal is your own body. You rise, you cross the room, you move toward the fireplace, and that motion tells her the call is over. But you are forbidden from making it until at least 15 minutes have passed, no matter how the conversation is going. So you sit, and you wait for permission from a rule, and you watch the door you are not yet allowed to walk toward. The 15-minute floor exists because leaving sooner would imply the visit wasn't worth having. Emily Post is clear on this. She is clear on most things. She is clear the way a judge is clear, not unkindly, but with a precision that suggests she has already considered your objections and found them insufficient. Her 1922 edition runs nearly 700 pages. The chapter on calling alone could sustain a graduate seminar. It does not sustain one, but it could. Let's talk about what you do while you wait. You talk. You offer nothing controversial, nothing personal, nothing that would require a follow-up visit to resolve. You mention the weather, which has opinions. You mention a mutual acquaintance, carefully, the way you'd pick up a vase you weren't sure was valuable. A good call in 1922 is less a conversation and more a shared performance of not quite saying anything, sustained for the exact correct number of minutes. The upper limit is 30. Overstaying 30 minutes is worse than not having come at all. Emily Post does not explain why. She doesn't have to. The why is obvious. You are not a resident. You are a visitor. There is a difference, and the fireplace exists to remind you. Mrs. Calloway, your caller today, neat, correct, and faintly armoured by her own hat, sits with her hands folded, because removing your hat in someone else's parlour would suggest you plan to stay longer than politeness allows. The hat stays on as a kind of promise. It says, I will leave. I have always intended to leave. I simply have not left yet. Her calling card is already on the tray by the door, folded at the upper right corner, which means she came in person rather than sending the card ahead by messenger. A distinction that mattered enormously in 1922 and exists today only as a fact you are currently learning. At whatever hour this is, at minute 16 you rise. You do not announce it. You do not say, well, I should let you get on with your day, which is a sentence that will not be invented for another 40 years and carries a different kind of cowardice entirely. You simply stand, and you begin the slow cross toward the fireplace, and Mrs. Calloway understands immediately. She rises, she gathers herself. She does not rush, because rushing would suggest she'd been waiting to leave, which is its own small insult. The whole thing takes about 90 seconds and involves no direct communication whatsoever. It's the most efficient system imaginable, except for the part where it takes 15 minutes to activate. The card she left has already done its work. It carries her name in the centre, except it isn't her name. It's her husband's, Mrs. Arthur Calloway, never Mrs. Margaret. Margaret ceased to operate as a formal social identity the day she married him, and the card is the proof of it. A formal introduction compressed to a small rectangle, the name on it belonging to someone else entirely. She's at the door now. You see her out with warmth, with genuine warmth, because none of this is personal. It's choreography. It's the same choreography your mother knew, and her mother before her, refined into something so automatic it barely feels like a system at all. It just feels like an afternoon. A correct one. You arrive, and the hostess is not at home. This does not release you. You still have to leave your cards, and there are wrong ways to do it. You do not push them through the mail slot. That is slovenly. You do not hand them to her children. That is nearly as bad as leaving them on her hall table yourself. You give them to the servant at the door, correctly, and you go. The visit still counts. You have called on a person who was not there, and the cards will tell her you did it properly. The cards are small. Your name sits in the centre in a typeface you selected carefully, thin and upright and quietly expensive looking, with the same attention a person now gives to whether their email signature looks formal enough for a first impression. Except the stakes here are whether Mrs. Calloway ever speaks to you again. You carry them in a small case. The case has opinions about how it's handled. You don't fumble it. The corner fold code is its own grammar, and by 1922 it was already fading, a whole social language being retired mid-sentence, like a conversation where all the participants have quietly agreed to stop but no one has said so out loud, and the stationery keeps arriving anyway. You learn the folds anyway. Knowing a dying system is still knowing something. Now you are not leaving 3 cards because you feel like it. You leave exactly 3, 1 of your own, 2 of your husband's, and you count them at the door, because arriving with the wrong number is a sum everyone in the household will redo after you've gone. The math is settled. It is not open to interpretation. A maid named Doris opens the door. She has been opening this door for 11 years and has the posture of someone who is quiet, thorough, and faintly disappointed by what the world keeps sending to the step. She accepts your cards without looking at them. This is correct. She is not supposed to look at them. You are not supposed to watch her not look at them. The exchange takes 4 seconds and contains multitudes. Of course, the whole system assumes you have cards. Having cards means you had them engraved, which means you went to a stationer, which means you exist at a social altitude where stationers are a normal errand. If you don't have cards, you don't not have cards loudly. You simply don't call, because arriving without cards is like showing up to a meeting with no pants. Technically, you're still there. Nobody mentions it. It's all anyone remembers. You have performed a social act for an audience of 1 maid and 0 hostesses. The hostess will learn of your visit through a small rectangle of engraved paper left in a bowl in her front hall, cream-coloured, cool, and precisely placed. She will know you came. She will know you left properly. She will know, from the unfolded corners, that this was a formal call and not a personal one. All of that, communicated by cardstock the size of a large cracker. Doris will set the bowl back on its table without comment. The bowl holds 3 cards now. She will move on to the next room. You do not leave the house with bare hands. Gloves go on before the door opens and stay on through the street, the shop, the streetcar, the entire public portion of your day. There are gloves for morning and gloves for evening, kid leather for formal hours and fabric for daytime errands. Taking them off at the wrong moment, in the wrong room, in front of the wrong person, is its own small failure. Your hands are not allowed to simply be hands in public. They are part of the outfit, and the outfit has rules. Fine, kid leather runs $2 to $5 a pair in 1922, which is roughly the price of a week's groceries depending on where you live, and they require regular laundering. Not washing, laundering. There is a difference, and the difference has opinions. You clean them while still on your hands, working a damp cloth in small circles because the leather holds its shape better that way. Then you peel them off carefully and lay them flat. A crease in the wrong place is not a disaster. It is just a very specific kind of sadness. At a formal dinner, the rules narrow further. You remove your right glove only. The right one. Your left glove stays on, or technically, folded down at the wrist, throughout the meal, because a woman arriving at the table with both gloves fully off reads as someone who did not know there was a protocol, which is a verdict that is swift, silent, and unappealable. The gloves also do not go on the table, ever. Placing your gloves on a dinner table is one of those violations that etiquette books describe in the same flat tone they use for everything else, which somehow makes it worse. The table is for crystal and silver and beeswax candles because beeswax is more flattering than electric light and the hostess has thought about your face more than you have. Margaret Howell, she's a guest at a dinner on Riverside Drive in 1923, reaches across to set her left glove on the tablecloth while adjusting her sleeve. The woman seated next to her says nothing. She doesn't have to. The glove sits there like a small accusation, and Margaret knows it the moment the fabric touches the linen. Now, the question of removing gloves in a shop. You do not, as a general rule, remove your gloves to examine merchandise. You handle goods through them. If you must remove a glove to feel the quality of a fabric, And sometimes you must. The fabric requires it. The fabric has made a case for itself. You do so briefly, with the air of someone consulting a document rather than someone enjoying the use of their own hand. The bare hand in a shop is a temporary condition. You treat it accordingly. Of course, none of this applies at home. At home, your hands can be hands. But the moment you step outside, even for a short errand, even on a warm afternoon when the gloves feel like small upholstered prisons, the expectation holds. A woman seen outdoors without a hat is assumed to be in distress, exercising, or common, and the bare-handed woman occupies a similar register. Not quite as bad, but noticed. The street notices everything, and it keeps records, and the records are maintained by every neighbour you have ever had. The kid gloves wear out. This is the other fact no one discusses. You spend the money, you do the careful laundering, you lay them flat to dry, and they wear through at the fingertips anyway, usually by spring. So you budget for new ones the way you budget for postage and soap. It's a recurring line item. Your hands cost money to maintain at a socially acceptable level of invisibility, which is, when you say it plainly, a remarkable arrangement. You sit down to a formal dinner wearing long evening gloves, and now you have to eat in them, more or less. You remove only the right glove, the one that will touch the fork. The left stays on, folded down at the wrist, or comes off entirely and rests in your lap. It never, under any circumstance, goes on the table. Eating with both gloves still on is wrong, but quietly wrong. Laying your removed gloves beside your plate is loudly wrong. You manage all of this between the soup and the fish, without appearing to manage anything. The table itself has opinions about you. The candles are beeswax, not electric, not paraffin, because beeswax is more flattering to the complexion, and a formal hostess in 1923 is thinking about your complexion even when you aren't. The light is soft and golden and extremely forgiving of the rouge you aren't supposed to be wearing. There are 8 forks. You will use 3 of them. The other 5 are there to observe. Let's talk about what you actually eat, because the food at a formal dinner is almost beside the point. There are courses. There are always courses. Soup arrives first, cream of something, served in a shallow bowl that requires a specific spoon motion, away from you, never toward you, which you learned from an etiquette manual at an age when you were also learning long division. Then fish, then a meat course, then a second meat course, in case the first one wasn't enough meat. Then a salad, which arrives after the meat because this is a formal American dinner of the early 1920s, and the salad goes where the salad goes. Then dessert, then fruit. By the time the fruit arrives, you have been seated for 2.5 hours, and your left wrist, still partially gloved, has developed an interesting cramp. A woman named Dorothea Fitch sits 2 seats to your left and has not once looked at her own gloves. She handles the entire progression: soup spoon, fish fork, meat knife, salad fork. With the calm of someone performing surgery she has performed 800 times. Her left glove is folded precisely at the wrist. 1 clean fold, not 2. She is aware you are looking. She does not acknowledge this. A formal dinner is the highest risk environment for cosmetics. You wore rouge to get here. You applied it at home, in privacy, with the correct amount of skill, which is to say, none of it is currently visible as rouge. Your cheeks are simply healthy. Your lips are simply a natural shade of deep rose. The effect is meant to read as natural, rested, and slightly better than you actually feel, 80 years before the beauty industry found a phrase for it, with your entire social standing attached to the outcome. Applying any cosmetics at the dinner table is, according to every etiquette authority currently in print, an act of open and unambiguous social failure. Emily Post doesn't hedge on this. You do not touch up your lipstick at the table. You do not powder your nose at the table. If anything requires attention, you excuse yourself. The table is for eating, conversation, and the careful performance of effortlessness. It is not a vanity. It is not even close to a vanity. You know this. Dorothea Fitch definitely knows this. The conversation flows in a particular pattern too. You speak to the person on your right through the first course, then pivot to your left for the second. Your hostess orchestrates this the way an air traffic controller manages a medium-sized regional airport, calmly, invisibly, with catastrophic consequences for anyone who doesn't follow instructions. If the gentleman to your right is boring, that is irrelevant. You have 3 courses with him regardless. The candles burn lower, the beeswax smells faintly of honey, warm and clean and faintly sweet, over the Chanel No. 5, and the brilliantine hair oil, and the very faint undertone of mothballs from the evening wrap someone retrieved from storage last week. Dessert arrives. You have both gloves off now, resting in your lap in a neat stack, because somewhere between the second meat course and the salad you made the executive decision and nobody said anything. The table didn't collapse. Dorothea Fitch didn't flinch. You survive the evening intact. You will send a thank you note within 48 hours. Handwritten. This is not optional. You own several pairs of gloves, and they cost you. A fine pair of kid leather runs $2 to $5, real money in 1922, and they do not stay clean on their own. They have to be cleaned, carefully, again and again, because soiled gloves are worse than no gloves at all in the eyes of anyone watching. So you budget for them, you maintain them. You treat a thing you wear on your hands like a small recurring household expense, because that is exactly what it is. There are types. Daytime calls require short gloves in neutral tones, white, ivory, pale grey, pale tan. Evening gloves are long, reaching past the elbow, and they're a different category of commitment entirely. Then there are the driving gloves, which exist in a third column, and the light cotton gloves you wear in summer because the rules don't pause for temperature. You own all of these. You maintain all of these. The glove situation has subcategories the way a tax return has subcategories, and they are roughly as forgiving. At a formal dinner, as you already know from last night with Dorothea Fitch doing her quiet demonstration 2 seats down, the right glove comes off. Just the right. The left stays on, or lapses folded at the wrist, or lapses. The key word in all of this is lapses. The glove does not go on the table. The table is not for gloves. This has been settled longer than you have been alive. Lay a glove on the linen anyway, and the woman across from you will notice it, file it, and never once mention it. Fine kid gloves, the ones required for anything that matters, have to be cleaned by hand, carefully stretched over a form, and left to dry without wrinkling. The leather is thin. It objects to water. It has to be coaxed. Agnes Merrill, whose mother came from Baltimore, and who has views on gloves the way some people have views on wine, owns a small wooden glove mold she inherited, narrow, smooth, and slightly warped from decades of use, and treats it with the seriousness of furniture. She lays each glove flat, fingers aligned. She does not rush the drying. The glove dries on her schedule, which is not your schedule, and Agnes makes peace with this daily. Of course you can buy a new pair. You do buy new pairs. The purchase is not the problem. The problem is that a pair lasts about as long as your optimism about the pair lasting, which is to say, less time than you hoped and more than you feared. $2 for something that absorbs city air, doorknob grime, the particular residue of other people's handshakes. $5 for the very fine ones, the ones that feel like wearing nothing and look like wearing everything. The glove budget is real. It appears unmissable between the hat budget and the stocking budget in the part of your finances you do not discuss. The rules for wearing them in public are mostly the rule that you are wearing them full stop. Outdoors, gloves are on. Indoors, at a formal occasion, gloves are on until you sit to eat, at which point one comes off. In between entering a home, greeting a hostess, sitting for tea, rising for departure, the gloves are present and accounted for. A woman seen without gloves at a formal call is doing something that reads, in the visual language of 1922, like arriving with one shoe. Not wrong, exactly. Just conspicuously incomplete in a way that everyone notices and no one says. And then there's the question of colour. Pale is correct. White is formal. Anything with embroidery is for weddings. Anything with embroidery and a colour is a choice, and the choice is being assessed. The gloves are not decoration, they are grammar. They tell whoever is looking what category of woman you have decided to be today, and the category had better be legible. You do not step outside without a hat, not to church, not to a shop, not to a friend's door. A bare head on a respectable street tells everyone watching that something has gone wrong, that you are unwell, or hurrying, or simply common. The cloche is the hat of the moment, bell-shaped and pulled low, sitting just above your eyebrows so you have to lift your chin to see. You wear it everywhere the public can see you. The hat is not an accessory. It is the price of being outdoors. The cloche rules from roughly 1923 to 1927, which is a 4-year reign for a piece of felt that allows almost no facial expression. Pulled that low, You communicate through chin angle. A slight lift means acknowledgement. A full lift means someone important has arrived. A neutral forward position means you are walking somewhere and do not wish to be delayed. The hat does the social work. Your face is mostly decorative at this point. The cloche has a requirement underneath it: short hair. Specifically, the shingled bob, which sits close to the skull and doesn't bulk beneath the crown. The cloche was not designed for a woman with a full pompadour, and a full pompadour was not designed for 1924. The hat and the haircut arrive together, and leaving your hair long while wearing a cloche produces a silhouette that the etiquette authorities describe, charitably, as effortful. Cutting your hair at all in the early years of the decade is its own negotiation. A woman who bobs her hair in 1921 may find her employer reconsidering her position. She may find a restaurant reluctant to seat her. She may find her own mother waiting in the front parlor with a prepared statement. The bob is visible evidence of a decision. And in 1921, visible evidence of a decision is something people feel entitled to have opinions about. Loudly, over dinner. For several months. Now, the hatless woman. Emily Post does not devote extensive space to this scenario, because the scenario is understood to explain itself. A woman seen outdoors without a hat is read as one of three things. She is in physical distress, she is engaged in athletics, or she is, the phrase goes, common, not bad, not scandalous, common, which in 1923 is its own category of social consequence, sitting just below scandalous and just above merely unfortunate. Margaret Hoover, a hat shop clerk on Michigan Avenue who adjusts the fit of 7 cloches before noon every Tuesday, is brisk, accurate, and entirely uninterested in your feelings about the fit. She demonstrates the approved angle with the same 2-finger press to the crown she uses on every customer. Forward, level, not tilted, not rakish. Rakish is for men and theatrical women, and the line between those two categories is not one Margaret draws in the workplace. The hat must also correspond to the occasion. A morning hat differs from an afternoon hat, and an afternoon hat differs from what you'd wear to an evening event. Though by the mid-20s this particular hierarchy has softened somewhat under the pressure of women who own fewer hats than the system theoretically requires, the etiquette books continue to print the full taxonomy anyway. The books are very committed to the taxonomy, and yet the hatless moment is coming. By the very end of the decade, younger women in certain cities are photographed outdoors without hats, and the photographs are published in magazines, not as cautionary images but as fashion. The cloche itself is already giving way to styles that sit further back, that allow more forehead, that begin to suggest a face might be worth showing. The hat is loosening its grip. It does not loosen it yet, though. This is still 1924. You are outside. Your cloche is on, sitting just above your eyebrows, tilted at precisely no angle at all. You lift your chin to see the street ahead. The hat approves. You are thinking about cutting your hair, and you understand that it is not only a haircut. Bobbing your hair in the early 1920s is a decision with consequences that reach well past the mirror. Women who do it have been turned away from restaurants, confronted by their own families, and in some cases quietly let go from their jobs. The scissors are cheap, the aftermath is not. You sit with the choice longer than the cut itself would take, because once the hair is gone, the explaining begins, and it does not stop for a while. The hair means several things at once. Long pinned hair signals restraint, respectability. Membership in the category of woman who does not require watching. The bob signals something else: movement, independence, a willingness to rearrange your silhouette for reasons that are yours and not your husband's or your employer's or the general public's. It is short, deliberate, and faintly confrontational even on a woman who has no intention of confronting anyone. The bob is not just shorter, it is louder, somehow, even on the quietest woman in the room. The salon is on a side street, not the Grand Avenue. You've chosen it carefully. A woman named Dolores runs the back chair, and she does not ask you twice if you're sure. She asks once, flat, the way a notary asks if you understand what you're signing. You say yes. She ties a cape around your neck with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done this before and will do it again and is not interested in the ceremony of it. The first cut lands in your lap. You look at it. It looks back. A department store on State Street in Chicago fires a bookkeeper in January of 1922 for appearing at work with a bob, citing, in the most generous reading of the termination letter, concerns about professional presentation. A restaurant in Cincinnati seats a woman with shingled hair near the kitchen, not out of proximity to the kitchen, but as a message. Her companion, who has not cut her hair, is seated near the window. The window table is the point. A woman's own mother in Dayton, Ohio, does not speak to her for 11 days. 11. Not 10, not 2 weeks. 11, which is the amount of time it takes her mother to run out of ways to signal disapproval without using words. And yet, by 1927, the bob is everywhere. The same restaurants that refused entry in 1922 are now seating bobbed women at the window tables. The department stores have quietly rehired, or quietly forgotten, or quietly promoted someone who cut her hair in 1924 and weathered the full 11 days of silence and then some. This is how the decade works. The thing that gets you fired in January becomes the thing that gets you hired by August, assuming you survive the interval. The interval is the part nobody writes about in the magazines. The men have opinions, they always do. Some find the bob alarming. Some find it attractive in a way they're not sure they're comfortable with. A few write letters to newspapers describing it as a symptom of something larger and more troubling than a haircut, which it is, but not in the way they mean. One letter, published in a Cincinnati paper in 1923, compares the bob to the decline of the Roman Empire. The bob is unmoved by this comparison. It continues being a haircut. The practical case for the bob is not nothing. Your hair dries in 20 minutes instead of 2 hours. It doesn't catch on anything. It doesn't require the 23 pins that hold a proper chignon in place before 8 in the morning. It fits under the cloche, which is the hat everyone is wearing by 1924, as if the two were designed together, and they were, more or less, each one making the other possible, the hat and the haircut arriving as a match set that the decade hadn't quite planned for but accepted once it showed up. The cloche needs the bob. The bob needs the cloche. You need both, apparently, or you are missing something the street will notice. You look at your hands and try to read them the way a stranger will. Long nails suggest either a woman who never works or a woman of questionable character, and there is no safe distance between those two. Coloured polish has just arrived, Cutex in a small bottle, liquid red, brand new and faintly scandalous. To paint your nails in 1925 is to invite a certain kind of attention, so you keep them clean, trimmed, buffed to a natural shine instead. Your hands are a document, and you are careful what they say. The Cutex bottle sits on your vanity table and watches you. It has been there for 3 weeks. You haven't opened it. It came with the clear version, which was fine, respectable, above reproach, but the red arrived in September, and the red is the problem. Red is for women in theatrical productions. Red is for women in photographs taken in cities you haven't visited. A woman in your building painted hers last Tuesday and hasn't been invited to anything since. The bottle radiates a kind of ambient dare. At a formal dinner, your hands are already a project before you sit down. You arrive in long evening gloves, kid leather, pale, expensive enough that you've hand-washed them twice this month. You remove the right one. Just the right. The left stays on, or folds down at the wrist like a little cuff, because the left glove on the table is a declaration of ignorance visible from across the room. A woman named Mrs. Harriet Cavendish once put both gloves on the tablecloth at a dinner in Chicago in 1923, and the woman seated next to her quietly moved her water glass 2 inches away. That's the whole story. That was enough. Fine. Kid gloves run $2 to $5 in 1922. This is the price of a week of groceries. You spend it. You spend it again. The gloves exist not because your hands are cold, but because bare hands, at a formal occasion, suggest you haven't thought carefully about your hands, and a woman who hasn't thought carefully about her hands clearly hasn't thought carefully about anything. The gloves are your credentials, you launder them like correspondence. Now, the buffing. A natural shine is the goal, not matte, not theatrical, not varnished. You use a chamois buffer and a small cake of paste, and you work in short strokes the way your mother showed you, the way her mother showed her, and the result is fingernails that are smooth, quiet, and entirely inert, communicating absolutely nothing about your personality, which is correct. Margaret, who does your hair on Thursdays, uses a little orange stick to push the cuticles back before she buffs, frowning with the concentration of someone diffusing something. The Cutex bottle is still watching you. By 1929, coloured lacquer will be everywhere. In department stores, in advertisements featuring women who look serene rather than theatrical. worn by women who are neither foreign nor scandalous but simply Tuesday. The bottle knows this somehow. It's very patient. It has opinions about timing, and its timing is better than yours. A woman's hands are supposed to communicate industry without roughness, leisure without idleness, femininity without vanity, and cleanliness without effort. They must appear tended, but not tended to. The maintenance must be invisible. It is effort engineered to look like luck, applied to your cuticles, and the stakes are your entire social credibility rather than a comments section. You fold your hands in your lap at the dinner table, right glove off, left folded at the wrist, nails buffed, red Q-Tex unopened at home on the vanity. You look at them again. They say exactly nothing, which means they are saying everything correctly. You are allowed to wear makeup, technically, as long as no one can tell. This is the rule, and it is a strange one. Rouge is permitted if it does not look like rouge. Powder is fine if it disappears into your skin. The moment your face reads as painted, you have lost. So you apply almost nothing, blended into nearly nothing, aiming for a face that looks exactly like your face on a slightly better day. You are doing work that must leave no evidence it was done. The whole skill is in the not showing. In 1920, visible rouge and lipstick place you in one of two categories, neither of which you want to be in. By 1929, American women spend roughly $2 billion a year on beauty products. That number climbed from about 17 million in 1914. The products didn't change the rule, they just made the rule more expensive to follow precisely. The goal was always the same, a face that looks like it isn't trying, achieved through considerable effort and a small arsenal of pots and brushes. Application happens at home, at your vanity, before you leave. This is non-negotiable. Touching up your lipstick at the dinner table is not a faux pas. It is condemned by every etiquette authority of the decade as an act of extreme vulgarity, which is the 1920s way of saying you have committed a social crime so obvious that even the fish fork knows. The distinction between wearing cosmetics and applying cosmetics in public is the entire point. One is permissible. The other announces that you have no idea where you are or who is watching. Across the table, Mrs. Dorothea Fitch dabs the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin and does not reach for her bag. She will not reach for her bag. Her lipstick was applied at 6:47 p.m. in her bedroom, in the correct light, and it will hold until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, she will excuse herself to the powder room like a civilized person. You're performing the appearance of naturalness, which takes more skill than either naturalness or obvious theatrics. Too little, and you look tired. Too much, and you look like the stage. The target is a very narrow corridor of plausible accident, effort dressed as genetics 80 years before anyone called it a tutorial, with considerably higher stakes than a comment section. The powders and rouges themselves carry their own social weight. If your rouge is detectable as rouge, it reads as theatrical, foreign, or morally ambiguous, three categories that, in 1920, overlap considerably in the popular imagination. The acceptable cheek is warm, even, and politely unconvincing about how it got that way. The acceptable cheek is one that simply looks healthy, convincingly healthy, suspiciously healthy, even, but not painted. The word painted is carrying significant freight this decade. Painted women are a known type. You are not that type. The powder compact in your purse quietly agrees. And of course, you're also navigating this while wearing gloves, keeping your hat level, maintaining a posture that the girdle has largely decided for you, and tracking whether you've been at this dinner for 17 minutes or 22. The face is just one surface in a much larger performance. It's the surface that has to look effortless. It does not get to look effortless by being effortless. You feel your nose go shiny at dinner, and you do nothing about it. You cannot. Reaching for a compact at the table, dabbing powder in a restaurant, drawing on lipstick where anyone can watch, all of it is condemned in the strongest terms the etiquette books own. Emily Post calls it vulgar without hesitation. If repairs are needed, you excuse yourself, you find a private room, you fix your face where no one will see the fixing. The maintenance is allowed. The witnessing of the maintenance is not. So you sit with the shine and wait. The private room is usually a powder room, which is named, with some irony, for exactly the thing you're doing in it. You close the door. A small mirror, usually oval, usually tilted slightly down, beeswax candles if the household is formal enough to care, because beeswax flatters the face in a way electric light simply refuses to. You have maybe 3 minutes before the absence becomes its own comment. You powder, you blot, you assess. The compact goes back into your evening bag. The evening bag closes with a click that sounds like a ruling. The evening bag is not a bag. It's a decision. Small enough to hold almost nothing, a handkerchief, a card or two, the compact you're not allowed to open at the table. It is neat, composed, and deliberately insufficient, communicating that you are a person who does not need to carry things, because you have people and places for things, which is the entire point. A large bag says you came prepared for contingencies. A small bag says you don't expect any. The bag is confident on your behalf. Meanwhile, across the table, your right glove sits beside your plate where you removed it before the first course. Your left glove is folded down at the wrist, not removed, not placed anywhere. This distinction matters. The left glove folded is considered acceptable. The left glove on the table beside the right glove is considered evidence. Evidence of what, exactly, is left unstated in the etiquette books, which is how you know it's serious. Fine kid gloves run $2 to $5 a pair in 1922, closer to $60 or $70 today, and you launder them yourself after every formal dinner because that is simply the economy of being a woman with standards and a finite income. A woman named Mrs. Farewell sits across from you. She's wearing Chanel No. 5, and what appears to be a small amount of brilliantine in her hair, which has been shingled close at the back so the cloche sits right on the day. She is in full possession of her face. She is not, as far as anyone can tell, wearing a single thing on it. She lifts her water glass with her right hand, and the gesture is exactly as practiced as it looks, which is to say, not at all apparently. The skill is not in the powder itself, not in the rouge, which costs 35 cents a pot and is available at any Woolworths. The skill is in the removal of all evidence that you ever needed any of it. A trick of erasure so complete that the result looks idle, accidental, and entirely free. The women who master this are described in the etiquette literature as naturally lovely. The women who don't are simply described as made up, and the phrase carries its own verdict. You excuse yourself after the fish course. You find the powder room. The compact opens. 3 minutes, maybe 4. You return to the table and no one says a word, which is how you know it worked. The shine is gone. Your face is back to its correct level of effort, which is none, which took you 40 minutes to achieve before you left the house. The candles glow. The gloves stay where they belong. The evening continues. You pick up the telephone to make a call, and you cannot simply say your name. You say all of it. Not, it's Mary, never that. You say, this is Mrs. Henry Thompson, your full married name announced into the receiver like a small formal arrival. The telephone is new enough that the rules around it are still being invented, and the rule makers have decided it deserves the same care as a front parlor. So you introduce yourself completely, every single time, to people who already know your voice. The party line is why. Your telephone doesn't connect only to the person you're calling. It connects to a shared wire, and on that wire are your neighbors, several of them, and at least one is always home, always available, and always quietly listening. Mrs. Harding 3 doors down. She isn't breathing loudly. She has mastered the art of held breath. You know she's there the same way you know a cat is in a room, not by sound, but by a faint attentive pressure. If you say it's Mary, you have identified yourself to everyone on the line as someone who either doesn't know the rules or doesn't care about them. Mrs. Henry Thompson, by contrast, announces that you are a person of correct habits. The neighbors hear this. The neighbors file it. The telephone is basically a shared ledger you didn't sign up for, and Mrs. Harding has been keeping entries in it since the line went in. What you cannot do on the telephone is most things. You cannot call a man at his office on social matters. This is reserved for genuine urgency, illness, emergency, something that cannot wait. Phoning him to relay a dinner invitation is not urgency. Phoning him because you have news is not urgency. The office is his domain, and the telephone is not a bridge between domains. The office has its own logic. You are not part of it. The rule doesn't say why. It doesn't need to. A caller named Edith Marsh. Edith, who has been using the telephone for 4 years and considers herself practiced, rings her husband's firm to tell him the Pattersons have moved the dinner to Saturday. She announces herself as Mrs. Gerald Marsh. She delivers the information. She rings off. By Thursday, 2 women in her social circle have registered, somewhere in the back of their minds, a quiet, persistent, and entirely unspoken concern about Edith's judgment. Nobody says this out loud. The concern is simply present, the same way a draft is present in a room where someone left a window open. The etiquette books are not dramatic about the telephone. They state the rules in the same tone they use for calling cards and dining gloves, matter of fact, precise, with the mild implication that anyone who requires explanation is already the problem. You identify yourself fully. You do not call a man's office socially. You keep calls brief, because the line is shared and your neighbour has her own calls to make and her own concerns to pretend she isn't monitoring. These are not suggestions. A woman who ignores them is noticed, and the noticing travels faster than she does. And then there is the question of what not to say, which is nearly everything of substance. Complaints about the household, disagreements with your husband, medical details, anxieties. The line is open. The line has always been open. Anything you say into it travels, and arrives somewhere you didn't intend, stripped of context and rearranged slightly by the time it lands. The telephone in 1923 keeps the manners of a front parlor and the privacy of a train platform. You learn to speak as though the whole street can hear you, because on a good day half of it can. You sit down to write a note, because some things are simply not done over the wire. A thank you owed after a dinner, a line of condolence, a reply to an invitation that arrived engraved and expects to be answered in kind. You keep good paper in a drawer for exactly this, and a pen that works, and you have roughly 2 days before the silence starts to mean something. The letter is slower than the telephone in every measurable way. It is also the channel everyone still takes seriously. The thank you note comes first, because it is the one with a clock on it. You attended a dinner. Within 48 hours a note must arrive, in your own hand, on your own paper, saying thank you in roughly 40 words that took you 20 minutes to choose. Typing it is out of the question. A typed thank you note in 1923 is the correspondence equivalent of mailing someone a receipt, technically the information, none of the warmth. The hand is the point. The small imperfection of the hand is the proof that a person, and not a machine, was grateful. The paper itself is doing work before you write a word. It is heavy, plain, and either white or a cream so pale it has to be argued for, engraved with your address if you can manage it, blank if you cannot, but never, under any circumstances, coloured. Coloured stationery, decorated stationery, perfumed stationery, these announce, in the reading of every etiquette authority in print, either an adolescent or a person who has never taught the difference. A note that smells of violets has said something about you before the first line. It has usually said the wrong thing. Mrs. Helena Ashby keeps a writing case on her desk, leather, monogrammed, and stocked like a small pharmacy of correctness. Pen, blotter, 3 weights of paper sorted by occasion. She answers an invitation the same afternoon it arrives, blots it once, and sets it aside to post. She does not consider this impressive. She considers it the minimum. The envelope has its own rules, and they are unforgiving. You address it by hand, in full, with the recipient's name and title spelled out completely. No abbreviations, because an abbreviation on a social envelope is one of the specific errors Emily Post took the trouble to name. You do not write street. You write street. You do not write Mr. and Mrs. You write every word out, as though shortening the address would shorten the respect. You seal it yourself. You do not lick it in front of company. This is the one thing the letter can do that the telephone cannot. It can be composed. You can write a sentence, dislike it, and feed it to the fire, and no neighbour 3 houses east will ever know the sentence existed. The wire says everything the instant you think it, to an audience you did not invite. The letter waits. It lets you choose your words and then quietly takes the credit for how calm you sounded. The handwritten note is the read receipt of 1923, proof of attention, delivered at the pace of the postal service, requiring effort precisely so the effort can be noticed. And the reply is not optional. A note left unanswered is a small debt, the same currency as a call unreturned, accumulating quietly in the place where social debts are kept. So you answer within the week, in your own hand, on the plain, heavy paper. The paper is not stationery. It is your character, pressed flat and folded into thirds. Margaret posts the day's letters on her way to the market. 3 of them, corners square, stamps straight. 1 is a thank you. One is a condolence. One is a reply to an invitation she would rather decline but will now attend, because the note declining it would have to be even better written than the note accepting, and she does not have the paper or the patience for that today. You want to telephone a man, and the rules tighten immediately. You do not call his office on social matters unless something is genuinely wrong. You certainly do not call him at home on a pretext, not unless you are engaged to him or related by blood. A telephone call from a woman to a man carries a weight you did not assign it, and everyone involved knows the weight. So you think hard before you place the call, you rehearse the reason, and you make very sure the reason will survive being overheard. Because it probably will be. The operator connects you. You wait. If a man answers, not a servant, not a wife, the man himself, the protocol sharpens into something close to ceremony. You identify yourself fully. This is Mrs. Henry Thompson. Not, it's Clara. Not, hi, it's me, Mrs. Henry Thompson, with all of Henry attached, so there is no ambiguity about who you are or whose you are. The name does two jobs at once. It announces you, and it defends you. Clara is a woman calling a man. Mrs. Henry Thompson is a household making contact with another household. These are different situations, apparently. The call should be brief, purposeful, and legible to any reasonable third party who happens to be listening, which, as you know, is a non-trivial group. You may relay a practical matter, a time to be confirmed, a message for his wife, a question about an arrangement involving both families. You may not telephone to chat. You may not telephone to say you were thinking of him. You may not telephone to say the thing you were actually calling to say. A secretary named Miss Galworth answers instead. This is, somehow, worse. Miss Galworth is pleasant and efficient and writes everything down on a small pad with a short pencil, and what she writes will be read by the man, possibly by his wife, possibly by everyone who passes through that office in the next 6 hours. You give her your name, Mrs. Henry Thompson, yes, the full version always, and a message stripped of every layer that made it feel necessary to call. What Miss Galworth writes down bears approximately the same relationship to your actual meaning as a telegram bears to a letter. The words arrive, the tone does not. If you are engaged to him, the restrictions loosen fractionally. You may call. You may even call twice in a week, without causing comment. But the content stays just as guarded, and the rule about full identification still applies. This is Miss Eleanor Marsh if you are not yet married. The ring does not change the protocol. It just changes who is technically allowed to use it. The telephone is something close to a trap. It exists. It sits in the hallway on its little table, or on the kitchen shelf, or on the desk in the study. It can connect you, in approximately 40 seconds, to the person you most need to speak with. And the rules ensure that what you say when connected is the one thing you cannot actually say. The telephone in 1922 is the fastest way to say almost nothing to almost anyone. The postal system gets you further. A note in an envelope addressed by hand, delivered by a messenger, containing only the words, "Could we speak?" Small, plain, and deniable, that gets further than 3 minutes on a party line, saying the name of a confirmed social engagement in a voice designed to sound like you had no particular feelings about it. You did not design this system. The system was here before you arrived. You would like to smoke a cigarette in public, and in 1920 that is very nearly unthinkable. No respectable woman lights one on the street, in a restaurant, or in front of a man who has not invited it. If you smoke at all, you do it carefully, often through a long holder that keeps the cigarette an elegant distance from your mouth and fingers. The holder is not only fashion, it is posture management, a way to smoke while still looking like someone who would never. You hold it lightly and watch who is watching. The holder keeps the smoke away from painted lips, away from gloved fingers, away from the immediate moral vicinity of your face. A woman smoking through a holder is performing a very specific kind of distance between herself and the thing she is obviously doing. It is the same logic as the rouge rule. The cigarette is acceptable if it doesn't look like a cigarette. Or at least, not quite. For most of the decade, the geography of acceptable smoking is extremely specific. A private dinner party where the host has produced cigarettes after dessert? Fine. A hotel lobby? Risky. A restaurant where other women are already doing it? Negotiable. The street? No. The street is always no. A woman on the street with a cigarette is not smoking. She is making a statement, and the statement is being received by every person she passes. none of whom asked for it. Now, this is where 1929 changes things in a way nobody anticipated. Edward Bernays, a publicist working for the American Tobacco Company, arranges for a group of women to light lucky strikes during the New York Easter Parade and March. He calls the cigarettes torches of freedom. The newspapers cover it as a news event. It is not a news event. Bernays sends the bill to Lucky Strike. The women hold their cigarettes and walk, and the photographs go everywhere. The smoking is real. The envelope it arrived in came from a tobacco company. Back in 1923, you are not thinking about any of this. You are thinking about the holder. A good holder is ivory, amber, or lacquered wood, slim, tapered, and deliberately understated. It is long enough to signal elegance and short enough not to look theatrical. Theodora Marsh, who sits 3 tables over at Zimmerman's on a Thursday, has one that is slightly too long. Everyone at your table has noticed. Nobody has said anything. The holder has opinions about scale, and Theodora's has exceeded them. The cigarette itself arrives with its own social choreography. You don't light your own if a man is present. You wait. If no man is present, you produce your own matches without comment, which is both more practical and, according to roughly half the etiquette literature of the decade, slightly unsettling. The unsettling half doesn't offer an alternative. It simply registers its discomfort and moves on, which is, in fact, what most etiquette literature does when it runs out of solutions. By 1927, the landscape has shifted enough that women smoking in certain contexts is no longer automatically scandalous. It is merely noted, commented on, filed. Whether it is acceptable depends on who you are, where you are, and whether your mother is in the room. The cloche hat is still required outside. The gloves are still required at dinner. The rouge is still required to be invisible. The cigarette has simply joined the list of things that must be managed at a precise level of visibility. You hold it correctly, you exhale away from the table. You do not let the ash get long. You are walking in the New York Easter Parade in 1929, and you are about to smoke on purpose, in public, as a kind of statement. A group of you have been gathered for exactly this, cigarettes lit on cue, and a man named Edward Bernays has arranged the whole thing for a tobacco company. He calls them torches of freedom. You are, in this moment, both a person having a cigarette and an advertisement having a cigarette. You strike the match where the cameras can see it, and the smoke does its job. Bernays handed you the cigarette and the argument together, that smoking bans were a kind of social control, and kept the receipt. The argument is real. So is the sponsorship. His uncle, as it happens, was Sigmund Freud, which he mentions to anyone who will sit still for it. The cigarette in your hand is not just a cigarette. It is the one violation that can't be hidden, and Bernays understood that this was exactly why it worked as theatre. You can't smoke discreetly in a parade. That's the point. A woman named Ruth Hale is said to have been among those recruited. She lit her cigarette with the composure of someone who had decided, months before this particular morning, that she was done performing otherwise. She held it the way the holder users didn't. No prop, no elegant distance. Just the cigarette, close and unambiguous. The press photographed her. The photographs did their job too. Lucky Strike benefited regardless of what anyone thought about freedom. The American Tobacco Company had been running ads telling women that cigarettes were better for the figure than sweets. Reach for a lucky instead of a sweet. One ad said smoke because you're liberated. The other said smoke because you'll be thinner. Both were selling the same cigarettes. By the time the parade ends and the cameras leave, the cigarette is finished and you are back to being a person on a street in New York. The rules haven't changed. You still don't light up on a public corner without consequence. You still hold the holder if you're indoors with people watching. The geography of acceptable smoking, private dining room, yes, street, no, parade, apparently yes if the press is there, hasn't been redrawn so much as briefly interrupted. Tomorrow the interruption is over. The rules close back around it like water. You step onto a dance floor and the dancers sort you instantly. The foxtrot is safe now, respectable. The dance of hotel ballrooms and people with nothing to prove. The trouble is the new ones. The Charleston, the black bottom, the shimmy, anything that moves the hips where the room can see them, draws the kind of attention you may not want. The music does not care which you choose. The watchers do, so you decide, in real time, how much hip the evening can afford, and you dance accordingly. The foxtrot earned its respectability through repetition. By 1922, it's in the ballroom dancing curriculum. in the hotel supper club rotation, in Emily Post's mental map of acceptable evenings. The foxtrot has a firm frame. Your partner holds you at a defined distance. You glide, you turn, your shoulders stay level. Nothing above the knee does anything emphatic. It is, essentially, the one dance that decided to cooperate with the existing social order and was duly rewarded for it. The Charleston did not cooperate. The Charleston arrived from Harlem, moved south and sideways through the reviews, and landed in general circulation around 1923, like a rumor that turned out to be true. The knees come together, the knees go out, the heels kick, the arms swing, the whole apparatus rotates. If someone photographs you mid-Charleston, you look like a person who has just discovered that their coat is on fire, but also doesn't fully mind. Every etiquette column that addressed it the same way, by citing the hips. The hips were the problem, not the heel kicks, not the speed. The hips, specifically, moving with visible intent. The black bottom followed in 1926, worked the hips in a different direction, and was condemned for entirely the same reasons. The shimmy, which was mostly just shoulders and the suggestion of everything else, had the additional problem of looking effortless, which the moralists found even more alarming than obvious effort. It was loose, fluid, and cheerfully unbothered, and a dance that looks like you're barely trying to be improper is somehow more improper than one that looks like work. Dancing the Charleston marks you, freely, physically, in full lamplight, as someone for whom the older rules are optional. That's the appeal and the cost simultaneously. Mrs. Margaret Holloway, who teaches ballroom at a studio on the second floor above a dry goods shop in Cleveland, handles this by offering both. She teaches the foxtrot on Tuesday evenings, the Charleston on Thursday. The Thursday class has a longer wait list. She maintains the same expression for both, pressing her lips together with the focused neutrality of a postal worker sorting envelopes. The distinction, she will tell you if asked, is between the useful and the fashionable. She does not specify which is which. Dance cards are still appearing in etiquette guides as late as 1922, those small pencil booklets where you fill in your partners by numbered dance so that no man can monopolize your evening and no woman can be stranded without one. By 1928, they're mostly an artifact. The bands are louder, the sets longer, the floor more crowded, the whole enterprise less formally brokered. The dance card tried to bring the ledger system of calling cards onto the dance floor. The dance floor, it turned out, was not interested in keeping receipts. What persists much longer is the chaperone. She is not always present by mid-decade, especially in cities, especially at the cabaret-style venues. But when she is present, she sits along the wall with the controlled posture of someone doing important work, which she is. She's not watching the dancing, she's watching the exits. You do not leave the room with a partner without knowing exactly where she is and whether she saw you stand up. The flapper, as image, as newspaper shorthand, as the silhouette on magazine covers, was technically a composite of violations. Bobbed hair, shortened hem, rolled stockings, visible rouge, the Charleston, possibly a cigarette holder. The flapper didn't accidentally break the rules. She broke them in the specific order most legible from across a ballroom. The rules, inconveniently, were also very specific about which violations were entertaining and which were merely ruinous. The distance between those two categories was narrower than the flapper's hemline suggested. You arrive at a formal dance and someone hands you a small booklet with a tiny pencil attached. This is your dance card, and you fill it in. Each numbered dance gets a partner's name penciled into its slot, your evening planned out in advance like a very small appointment book. Once a name is written, the dance is promised, and breaking that promise is a real offence. So you manage the little book carefully, weighing who to write where, because the pencil makes commitments your feet will later have to keep. The card itself is about the size of a matchbook, stiff, cream-coloured and faintly formal. A silk cord loops through one corner so it can hang from your wrist when your hands are occupied. The pencil is so small it was clearly designed by someone who had never actually tried to write with one, or who believed that women's handwriting should be correspondingly miniature. You press the tip to the paper and the letters come out approximately legible. The card is not a list. It is a contract, signed in pencil and binding for the whole evening. Filling in the card has an order to it. Who asked first? Who counts socially? Who is standing next to someone whose opinion matters? You don't just hand over a slot to the first name that walks up. Theodore Marsh, whose family summers in the Berkshires, gets the waltz that opens the second half. That one was easy. The problem is the number 4 slot. and the man hovering near the punch table who has asked twice and is beginning to look like he intends to ask a third time. You pencil in his name for number 8, which is politely late in the evening but not an insult. He seems satisfied. He shouldn't be. The full card is the goal. A woman with empty slots by 9 o'clock is broadcasting something, and the room will decide what. It's a very small document to carry a very large social verdict. None of this is new by 1922. Emily Post includes dance cards in her first edition largely as a courtesy to a system already beginning to fade. Younger women in larger cities are starting to find them faintly old-fashioned, something their mothers handled with more ceremony than the current moment requires. But in smaller cities, in certain families, in the kind of ballroom where the invitation arrived engraved rather than printed, the card is still the system. You use it. You use it correctly. X. The chaperone has been sitting against the far wall for 2 hours, watching the room with the specific focus of someone who was asked to be here and intends to justify the ask. Before you can accept any name into any slot, particularly for a dance that carries obvious physical contact, you may need to briefly incline your head in her direction and receive a nod. The nod is permission. Absence of the nod is information. Missus. Adeline Foss, who chairs this position for 3 nieces simultaneously across the room, does not look at you when she declines. She simply turns slightly toward the window. The turn does not mean she didn't see you. The turn is the answer. The men have their own choreography around this. A young man wanting your number 3 slot must approach correctly, not interrupt a conversation, not signal from across the room, not send a friend as a proxy. He arrives beside you, says something brief and appropriately indirect, and waits. You consult your card as though checking whether space is available, even if you've known since he walked in that it was. The ritual requires the pause. He doesn't mind the pause. The pause is also part of the system. By 1928, another dance in a different kind of room, there is no card. The band starts and you either have a partner or you find one mid-floor. The little pencil and silk cord booklet is sitting in someone's mother's drawer, slightly flattened, still containing the names from an evening in 1921. The 8 slot still says Gerald. Nobody can remember if Gerald was any good. You are young and unmarried, which means you are rarely entirely alone. A chaperone comes with you, an older woman whose job is to be present, to watch, and to make your respectability visible to everyone in the room. You do not get to leave her behind. Where you go, she goes, to the dance, to the dinner, to the afternoon out. The system is fraying by the late 1920s, but in the right circles it still holds. And in those circles your good name and her line of sight are the same thing. She sits. Primarily she sits, in chairs arranged along the perimeter of any room where young people are interacting. She watches. She drinks whatever is offered. She does not participate in the dancing. She observes it, the way a building inspector watches a project she already has concerns about. If a man approaches you, she is near enough to hear the first sentence. She is close enough that any touching, any leaning, any whispered comment of substance would happen inside her awareness. This is not accidental. Her proximity is the entire job. She is not a guest. She is a witness with a fan, Missus. Aldrich, she is always someone's aunt, always called Missus. Something has a specific chair at the Henderson's Musicales, second from the left, near the potted fern, and she occupies it with the territorial confidence of someone who has held the seat for 11 consecutive seasons. She is patient, still, and quietly certain. She fans herself with a small ivory fan and nods at you when a man leaves your vicinity. The nod means he is acceptable. A slower fan means she has questions. The chaperone system exists on a sliding scale by this point in the decade. In New York, among a younger crowd, it's already half retired. Women in their 20s move more freely through the city, taking taxis alone, meeting friends at tea rooms, attending afternoon screenings without a guardian. In Chicago, the fraying is similar. But in certain homes, in certain families, in towns where the 1920s feel more like suggestions than a settled fact, the chaperone persists with full ceremonial weight. She doesn't know she's a holdover. She thinks she's essential. She may be right. An unmarried woman does not ride in a closed automobile alone with a man who is not her relative. Not because it's illegal, because the interior of a closed automobile is a private space, and private spaces require witnesses. The chaperone can sit in the back seat. She will sit in the back seat. She will look out the window and say nothing for 40 minutes. but she will be there, present as institutional furniture, smelling faintly of talcum powder and someone else's perfume. The flapper has already found her way around this. She dances without the card, smokes at parties, travels in groups that function as their own loosely organized immunity from scrutiny. The group is the new chaperone. 5 friends constitute a social alibi in a way that one aunt cannot counter. This isn't a rejection of the principle, it's a workaround, quiet and efficient, the kind that doesn't announce itself as rebellion and therefore survives longer than rebellion does. The chaperone's authority extends into the letter writing too. An unmarried woman writing to a man she's met socially keeps it brief, proper, and if she has any instinct for self-preservation, visible. Leaving a letter where Mrs. Aldrich might see it is not an accident. It is a performance for the record. The correspondence is innocent because it is legible. The decade will not remember this dynamic fondly, but in 1922 it is simply Tuesday. You want to dance with someone, and the request does not come to you first. A gentleman who wishes to dance is expected to ask your chaperone, or the woman accompanying you, before he asks you. Permission flows through her. You stand nearby while 2 other people negotiate the next 3 minutes of your evening, and only then does the question reach you, already half answered. The custom is fading fast, but where it survives, you learn to wait for a yes that someone else gives on your behalf. The dance card is the other half of this system. It's a small booklet, paper, sometimes with a little pencil attached by a silk cord, and each numbered line corresponds to a numbered dance. You fill it in ahead of time, which sounds organized, which sounds efficient, which sounds like nothing that could possibly go wrong. It does not prevent a man from claiming 3 dances in a row and standing too close for all of them. The dance card has no mechanism for that. Emily Post's 1922 edition still includes the dance card as though it is a living institution. By 1928, it is mostly a relic, surviving at debutante balls and formal cotillions where tradition is maintained with the focused determination of a man saluting a flag in a thunderstorm. Not all dances are equally dangerous. The foxtrot is fine. The foxtrot has been domesticated. By the mid-1920s, it's the musical equivalent of a firm handshake, respectable, rhythmic, unlikely to cause a scene. The waltz is practically a civic duty, but the Charleston is something else. The Charleston involves visible hip movement, airborne knees, and a general physical confidence that the etiquette authorities of the decade find alarming, loud, uncontained, and entirely too pleased with itself. The shimmy is worse. The black bottom, which arrives around 1926, is worse than that. A columnist in a 1927 issue of the Ladies' Home Journal describes the Charleston as incompatible with the dignity of a well-bred young woman, which is a sentence that has never once stopped a single well-bred young woman from doing the Charleston. Mrs. Hargrove, one of the type of chaperones who still attends in 1923, sits in a chair at the far end of the room and does not tap her foot to the music. She watches the floor with the focused attention of a woman waiting for something to go wrong so she can have been right about it. Her fan is closed. The fan has been closed since she arrived. At some point during the black bottom demonstration at the Millbrook Club, she closes it a second time, out of habit. The flapper navigates all of this differently. She has already decided that the Charleston is worth whatever the columnist says about her dignity. She's cut her hair, which cost her something real, early in the decade. A bobbed haircut got women fired, refused service, lectured by their own mothers over Sunday dinner. She has opinions about hip movement that she keeps to herself because keeping them to herself is faster than the argument. She dances the foxtrot when she must and the Charleston when she can, and at some point in the evening she retreats to the powder room with a compact she is not supposed to open in public. She opens it in public anyway. The compact has no opinion about this. The mirror, honestly, seems relieved. You sit down to a formal dinner and the table is a test laid out in silver. A row of forks, a battalion of glasses, courses arriving in an order you are expected to already know. You work from the outside in, you match the right tool to the right plate, and you do it without pausing to think, because the thinking is what gives you away. Every choice is watched, quietly, by people pretending not to watch. The meal is food. It is also an examination, and there is no study hall. The gloves, you arrived wearing them. You are still wearing them now, both hands, as the soup is set down. The left glove stays on. The right glove comes off. Just the right. You peel it back from the wrist with a calm you have rehearsed, fold it into your lap, and now your right hand is bare and your left hand is still dressed, which looks, to anyone outside the decade, like you lost a bet. But inside the decade it is correct. A woman who removes both gloves is underdressed. A woman who places either glove on the table is finished. The table is for silverware and china and crystal, and a glove laid on the linen seems to cool the whole stretch of it. Missus. Constance Aldrich, seated 2 chairs down, does not place her gloves on the table. She tucks them into her lap with one practiced motion and reaches for the outermost fork without looking at it. This is the performance, not the fork itself, finding the fork. Anyone can find the outermost fork. The performance is finding it without the half-second glance downward that announces you had to look. The candles are beeswax. Not because beeswax is more practical, it isn't, particularly, but because beeswax light is warmer, softer, and more forgiving than electric light, and a formal dinner table in 1923 runs on the principle that everyone at it should appear slightly better than they are. The smell is faintly honeyed, mixed with Chanel No. 5 from your left, and something that might be brilliantine from your right, and beneath it all the distant suggestion of mothballs that someone's fur wrap did not entirely lose in storage. It is a layered smell. You don't comment on it. Nobody comments on it. The courses arrive in sequence: soup, fish, an entree, a roast, a salad placed after the meat in the continental manner, dessert. You know this order the way you know the alphabet, not because you thought about it, but because you have been drilled in it since approximately age 7 by a mother who treated the dinner table like a flight simulator. Missing a beat means you reach for the wrong glass. There are 4 glasses. Each has a purpose. One of them is decorative in the sense that you are not expected to drink much from it, only to hold it at the correct angle when you do. The cosmetic situation is specifically inconvenient here. You cannot refresh your lipstick at the table. Every etiquette authority of the decade agrees on this point with the unified energy of a jury returning in under 10 minutes. Applying lipstick at dinner is condemned as an act of deep, irredeemable coarseness, not impolite, not merely unfortunate, but a social crime in 3 syllables. You excuse yourself. You find the powder room. You handle your face in private, which is where your face is supposed to be handled. You return. Nobody acknowledges you left. This is also correct. The dinner conversation runs parallel to the food, equally structured, equally monitored. You speak to the person on your right through the first courses, pivot to the left for the later ones. The hostess manages this rotation with hand signals that look casual and are not. You don't raise a topic that is controversial, personal, or more interesting than the room can handle. The rule isn't silence. It's calibrated mild engagement, like a thermostat set to exactly 68 degrees for 4 hours straight. A formal 1920s dinner conversation has the structural integrity of small talk with a building permit. At some point, the dessert arrives and you eat it with the correct spoon, which is the small one at the top of your place setting that you have been carefully ignoring since you sat down. You finish. You set the spoon down at the 4 o'clock position on the plate, because resting it differently means something, or once meant something, or might mean something to somebody at the table, and this is not the decade to find out which. You get dressed and something still has to hold you in. The corset has not actually disappeared, whatever you have heard. It has changed shape, become a step-in girdle, an elastic foundation that flattens you into the straight, tubular line the decade prefers. The hourglass is out. The column is in. Either way, something is shaping your body before the dress goes on, and you fasten yourself into it every morning. The silhouette is new. The fact of being engineered into it is very old. The dress goes over. The hemline sits somewhere between the knee and the ankle depending on the year, your city, your age, and your level of interest in being discussed at church. A woman in New York in 1926 is wearing something considerably shorter than a woman in rural Indiana in 1926. And both of them are correct, and both of them are wrong, depending entirely on who is looking. The flapper you have seen in magazine illustrations, the one with the rolled stockings and the flask, is mostly a fantasy sold by cartoonists. Most women are making practical compromises between what is modern and what their mother will survive seeing. The hat is not optional. You are not leaving the house without one. Going hatless outdoors marks you as one of 3 things: a woman in athletic distress, a woman in genuine distress, or a woman who simply does not know better. These are not equivalently bad, but none of them is good. The cloche sits low on your forehead, right down to the eyebrows, pulling close, neat, and uncompromising to the skull, which works very well with the new shingled hair underneath and looks quite relentless on everyone else. Margaret at the millinery counter on State Street adjusts yours with 2 fingers and a straight face as if she is calibrating something important. She is. The step-in girdle does not lace. This is the improvement. It steps in, hence the name, and smooths you into the preferred silhouette. Flat chest, flat hips, no visible architecture. The whole point of the tubular line is that the body underneath it should not read as a body. It should read as a column. Number. A column wearing silk charmeuse. Lulu Hunt Peters, whose diet manual has gone through 50 printings since 1918, would like to remind you that the girdle works better at 1,200 calories. She prints the calorie charts right there next to the column on proper table deportment, in the same issue, on the same page, as if these are naturally adjacent concerns. They are, apparently. They are. Now, the stockings. They are rolled or they are not rolled, and this is a declaration either way. Rolled stockings, gathered below the knee while you dance, then smoothed back before you sit down, suggest that you have been dancing in a way that required the rolling in the first place. This is the implication. You understand the implication. Your aunt certainly does, from across the room, before you've touched the punch. Every piece you put on is a position. The cloche says you are modern but hatted. The gloves say you understand indoor versus outdoor. The hemline says you have made a calculation. The step-in girdle says nothing, because no one can see it, but it is there, holding the column in place, doing quiet structural work beneath everything visible. Clara, your neighbour's daughter, abandoned her girdle sometime in 1927 and told no one. The column still works, technically. She is not volunteering information. The flapper image gets all the attention, but the actual work of dressing in 1923 is mostly about managing the gap between what exists and what is permitted. The clothing is getting looser. The rules are not getting looser at the same pace. You fasten the last hook. The hat goes on. You check the angle in the mirror. Not too far back. Not pulled so low it reads as sulking. There is a correct angle. There is always a correct angle. You read the magazines and you see the flapper, knees out, hemline high, and then you look down at your own skirt, which is nowhere near your knee. The famous silhouette belongs to a small set of young, urban, well-funded women. For most of the early 1920s, your hem sits 8 or 10 inches off the floor, well below the image everyone pictures. You are living in the decade of the flapper without being one. The photograph in the magazine and the skirt on your body are 2 different decades, worn at the same time. The bobbed hair, the bare arm, the painted nail, each one of these is technically available to you, and each one carries a specific social consequence depending on where you live, what you do for work, and who your mother-in-law is. A woman in Chicago in 1922 who cuts her hair into a bob may keep her job. A woman in a small town in Ohio who does the same thing in 1922 may not. The bob has opinions about you before you even sit down in the chair. Early adopters, meaning women who cut in 1920 or 1921, face the version where the opinion is loudest. Restaurants refuse them tables. Employers cite morality clauses that turn out to be mostly about hair. A father calls it a disgrace. A husband calls it a question. The bob arrives in your town looking like a revolution and gets treated like a public health concern. Elsie Bartram, a switchboard operator in her late 20s, cuts her hair in March of 1922 and comes to work on Monday. Her supervisor, a woman with her own hair pinned in the style of approximately 1912, looks at Elsie for a long moment and then looks back at the switchboard. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be said. Elsie keeps her job by the width of her hair, which is, at this point, considerably shorter than it used to be. Meanwhile, the cosmetics situation is doing something similar. You can wear rouge. The rule is simply that no one must be able to tell you are wearing rouge, the invisible application of a visible product. The effect should read as health, not effort. Cheeks that are naturally flushed, lips that are naturally deep, skin that has simply decided to be luminous on its own. This is, essentially, the tutorial that gets posted 80 years later under phrases like, "your skin but better," except the stakes here are your entire character rather than your comment section. By 1929, American women spend roughly $2 billion a year on beauty products. In 1914, it was 17 million. The decade didn't relax the rules about cosmetics. It expanded the market while keeping the rules in place. You spend more money looking like you spent no money. The economy of it is its own kind of achievement. And then there are the nails. Cutex releases liquid-coloured nail lacquer in 1925, and painted nails arrive in the same cultural package as theatrical women, foreigners, and a loosely defined moral concern. The lacquer itself is bright, glossy, and unapologetic in a way the decade has not quite prepared a framework for. The product exists. The social permission to use it in all company does not quite exist yet. You can paint your nails in 1926 if you are prepared for the nails to speak before you do, and to say something you didn't choose. A painted nail in the wrong room in 1926 is a rumour you didn't start. The decade hands you options and attaches a tariff to each one. The bob is available, the tariff is your supervisor's expression on a Monday morning. The nail colour is available. The tariff is whatever the room decides it means about you. The lipstick is available. The tariff is that you apply it somewhere private, because applying it at the table is condemned by every etiquette authority and print as rank, unforgivable, beneath the pale impropriety, not impolite, not improper, but a word that lands like a verdict. That word was always doing more than its share. You open a women's magazine and the calorie charts sit right next to the etiquette columns. Thinness has become its own kind of manners. A book by Lulu Hunt Peters has taught the country to count calories, 1,200 a day if you mean to lose weight, and the counting is framed as discipline, modernity, good character. So you watch the numbers the way you watch everything else, carefully, publicly, as a thing you can get right or wrong. The body has become one more surface the rules apply to. Lulu Hunt Peters published Diet and Health, with Key to the Calories in 1918, and it never really stopped printing. 50 editions. More. The central argument is that food has a number, and your number tells people something about you, not your hunger, your character. A woman who counts correctly is a woman who has herself in hand. A woman who doesn't is, apparently, a woman who has let things slide in a way that is difficult to specify but easy to notice. The 1,200 calorie baseline sits in the magazine the same way the 17-minute call limit sits in Emily Post. Precise, authoritative, slightly arbitrary. Both arrived with citations that sounded like science and behaved like law. The tubular silhouette is not optional. The fashionable 1920s body is narrow, flat-chested, and without visible hips, a shape that requires either luck or effort, and the etiquette of effort is that you don't show it. You don't say you've been eating 1,200 calories. You arrive looking as though this is simply how you are. The corset loosens its grip through the decade, replaced by the step-in girdle, which is lighter, more modern, and still absolutely there. The girdle smooths. The chart counts. Together they do the work the old corset did, just with more paperwork. Margaret, a women's magazine columnist in Chicago, runs calorie tables and glove guidance in the same weekly column without noting any difference in category. It is MyFitnessPal and Emily Post sharing a masthead, decades before either had the name for it. You eat correctly, and you call correctly, and you dress correctly, and the sum of it is that no one notices you doing any of it, which is the goal. The tubular silhouette lands differently on different bodies, and the magazines decline to address this in any useful way. The calorie chart does not have a footnote. The silhouette does not have a footnote. Both assume a reader who is close enough to the target shape that effort can close the gap. If you are further from it, the gap is still framed as effort, just more of it. Harder, longer, quieter effort. The chart does not acknowledge the distinction. The beeswax candles at a formal dinner flatter the face, which is part of why they're preferred over electric light. The light is doing work. The menu is doing work. The girdle is doing work. By the time you sit down to a 1923 dinner smelling of warm wax, Chanel No. 5, and someone's mothballed evening coat, the calorie chart is just one more thing you carry in your head, managed at the table, in the dark, while wearing one glove. The dish comes around a second time and you wave it past. You wanted it. Your plate is clean and you leave it clean, and across the table a woman you barely know registers the gesture and approves of it without saying so. The serving spoon moves on. You close the magazine. The chart is still in your head. It follows you to the table, to the fitting room, to the scale someone has now put in the bathroom, because scales are modern, and the modern woman knows her number. The number doesn't comment on this arrangement. It just waits. You are told, repeatedly, to stand correctly. The new tubular clothing wants a particular line from your body, and physicians and physical culture experts have firm opinions about how you should hold yourself to produce it. Shoulders here, spine like this, chin at this angle. You practice it until it stops feeling like a pose. Correct posture is presented as health, but it is also appearance, and the two are tangled together so thoroughly that holding yourself wrong becomes a small moral failure. You carry your own body like a thing being graded. The magazines have diagrams, actual diagrams, the kind you associate with load-bearing architecture, except the load-bearing structure is you. A dotted line runs from the crown of your head to the heel of your shoe, and your job is to be vertical in relation to that line. If you slouch, you are not merely slouching, you are revealing something. Women's physical culture manuals of the early 1920s describe poor posture the way a later century would describe a character flaw, not quite a vice, but adjacent to one, close enough to warrant correction. Sitting has rules. You lower yourself into a chair from the knees, not the hips, which requires a particular relationship with gravity that the tubular silhouette simultaneously demands and makes more difficult. You sit with your back touching the chair's back only lightly, because settling too deeply into a chair communicates ease, and ease communicates comfort, and comfort in a formal setting communicates that you are not paying sufficient attention to being observed. Matilda Voss, a finishing school graduate from Cincinnati, sits in what her instructor calls the alert position, meaning 2 inches from the backrest, spine lifted, ankles crossed, not crossed at the knee, because crossed at the knee is 1929, and you are not there yet. She does this for 4 hours a day. Her posture is excellent. Her lower back has opinions about this that it keeps to itself. Walking 2 is a performance with technical specifications. The new silhouette rewards a gliding gait, smooth, even, and unhurried, rather than anything that might be described as purposeful or brisk. Brisk is athletic. Athletic is fine for tennis, but reads as masculine or, worse, working class on a city street. The goal is forward motion that looks vaguely effortless, like a ship on calm water, which is achievable if you have spent several months practicing it and are not also carrying a handbag, a market parcel, and the weight of a fully structured cloche hat sitting low on your forehead. Movement from a chair to a door, crossing a room, has its own choreography. You don't pivot. You turn. The distinction matters to no one watching and to everyone watching simultaneously. At a formal call, your hostess watches how you rise. At a dinner party, the table watches how you take your seat. In a restaurant, the room catalogues your entrance in the time it takes you to locate your party. You are, at all times, mid-performance, whether or not you agreed to be on stage. Matilda holds her position and the room takes her in before she has said a word. She stays vertical to the dotted line that runs from the crown of her head to her heel. Her lower back, as ever, keeps its complaints to itself. You are being collected by automobile, and you had better be ready. Keeping the car waiting while you finish dressing is rude, a waste of the driver's time, and, in winter, a genuine discomfort to everyone already sitting in it. And when you do climb in, where you sit is its own question. The seat beside a male driver carries associations you may want to avoid, so the proper place is often the rear. The machine is new, the rules around it newer, and they are being written around you as you reach for the door. The automobile itself smells like cracked leather and machine oil, with a faint top note of dust from whatever unpaved road it crossed to get here. The upholstery is stiff, the springs assertive, and the floor is not entirely level. None of this is commented on. You arrange your coat, settle your cloche low over your forehead, and place your hands in your lap in a manner that suggests you have always been comfortable in mechanized vehicles, even though the first one you ever rode in was roughly 4 years ago. The cloche has opinions about cars. It sits just above your eyebrows, not on your brow, not tilted, just above, and the close fit means it does not blow off, which is its one genuine advantage in an open-topped vehicle. The shingled hair beneath it stays neat by design. The hat and the hair evolve together as a system which is more coordination than most committees achieve. Going hatless, even in a private automobile, remains inadvisable for any stop where you might be seen emerging. A woman seen bareheaded outside a private residence is either athletic, distressed, or common, and no one will pause to ask which. Your gloves are on, both of them. They stay on for the duration of the ride, which is not a hardship. Fine kid, probably, pale and clean and freshly laundered, which costs somewhere between $2 and $5 a pair. A budget item never quite discussed as such, but absolutely there. The gloves exist in the car as they exist everywhere else, as proof that you finished dressing before you left the house, rather than en route, which is a distinction that matters to everyone present. Mrs. Fairfax Whitmore, seated already in the rear, adjusts her bag to make room and does not look at it while she does so. That's the gesture. The bag moves, she looks at you, and the look says, "You are almost on time." Almost is accepted. Almost is, in the hierarchy of automobile arrivals, a generous gift. The car is its own small theatre. You are visible through the windows. Other people on the street can see you sitting, can observe the angle of your hat, the posture you are performing, the company you are keeping. The automobile promised freedom and delivered a moving display case. You are being transported and exhibited simultaneously, which is efficient if nothing else. None of this is stated directly. The etiquette of automobiles in the 1920s exists largely as inference, extracted from general rules about public conduct and applied to a machine that nobody quite planned for. Emily Post covers carriages with precision. The car inherits the rules by proximity and improvisation. You're expected to deduce the rest, which is the same approach taken to most things this decade, and it works about as well as you'd expect. The driver, if male and not your husband, is addressed by his last name. You thank him at the end of the journey, not effusively. Once. The car pulls away from the curb, the leather creaks under the turn, and the city comes at you through the glass. Other hats, other coats, other women arranged correctly in other vehicles, and you are, for the length of this ride, exactly where you are supposed to be, doing exactly what you are supposed to do, in a machine still new enough that the rules governing it haven't hardened yet into something you could be formally corrected for breaking. You go out for the evening, and the place you are going does not officially exist. Prohibition has made the drink in your hand illegal since 1920, and yet here you are, in a speakeasy, among other respectable women doing exactly the same thing. The etiquette books say nothing about any of this. They simply go quiet, as though the whole institution is not there. So you improvise the manners yourself. In a room the rule writers refuse to acknowledge, holding a glass no guide will admit you are holding. The door first. There isn't one. There's a laundry, or a tobacconist, or a perfectly ordinary flower shop with a man behind the counter who looks at you for a long moment before he moves. You have been introduced through a friend of a friend, which means someone stood in front of someone else and said your name out loud and attached their own credibility to the statement. It's the calling card system, minus the card, minus the engraving, minus Emily Post. The social mechanics are identical. The stakes are considerably higher. Inside, the rules reassemble themselves from memory. You don't sit at the bar. Not yet. That arrives later in the decade for women of a certain nerve. You are at a table, and the table has a cloth, and the cloth has a candle on it, and the candle is not beeswax. Nobody here is thinking about flattering light. The candle exists to be dim. Dim is the whole point. Dim is a legal strategy. Now, someone offers you a cigarette. This is the room where that happens first, before it migrates upward into respectability. A woman named Dorothea, she has told you to call her Dot, which is already the most relaxed thing that has happened to you all week, holds out a silver case and waits. The cigarette holder you've brought is slender, lacquered, and perfectly unapologetic, keeping the smoke a tidy distance from your face. You accept. The holder does the rest. It's there to say, I am doing this elegantly, and elegance is the last available defense. The etiquette books have entire chapters on gloves at dinner, on the correct angle to leave a calling card, on whether the hostess may stand before the 15th minute of your visit has elapsed. They have nothing on how a respectable woman holds herself in an illegal basement. So you borrow from what you know. You sit straight. You don't shout over the jazz. You lean in. You keep your gloves in your lap rather than on the table, because some habits survive the address. The glass you hold by the stem, not the bowl, because someone taught you that once and the lesson has nowhere else to go tonight. The band is playing something with hips in it, not the foxtrot which has been domesticated into drawing rooms and declared safe. Something with more opinion than that. The Charleston has been in the papers as a moral catastrophe for 3 years running, and here it is in person, and it turns out the catastrophe is just people enjoying their knees. You watch, you decide. The decision is its own kind of etiquette, the speakeasy version, where the rule is simply that you read the room, and the room has already agreed to be honest tonight. The room also has a back exit. Everybody knows where it is. Nobody points at it. That's the final rule of the place, the one that holds everything else together and that no manual will ever print. You know what to do if a door opens that shouldn't, and you do it without making a scene, because making a scene is still, in any room, the worst possible offense. You are a black woman in 1920s America, and the rules written for you are not printed in any etiquette book sold as one. They are enforced by law and by custom, and they demand a daily performance of deference. You enter certain places through the rear door. You are addressed by your first name while expected to return a title. In many shops, you are not permitted to try on the clothing before you buy it. The national etiquette industry addresses you and excludes you at once, and you navigate both versions every day. The department store. You have money. This is not in dispute. The saleswoman can see your coin purse. But the blouse on the mannequin cannot touch your body before it touches hers, and that is the policy. And the policy is not written anywhere because it doesn't need to be. You point, she describes. You decide without trying. The fitting room is a room you are not having a conversation about today. Now add a hat to this. The cloche is everywhere in 1925, close, low, and aggressively forward-tilted, suggesting exactly the kind of angular modern certainty the decade is so proud of. You want one. You are allowed to want one. But Claudette, the salesgirl at the counter on State Street in Chicago, holds it by the brim and tilts it toward you with 2 fingers, not placing it on your head, not offering the mirror, just tilting, at arm's length, as though demonstrating a hat in a catalogue that happens to be standing in front of her. You buy it or you don't. The mirror is technically available. The gesture makes it technically unavailable. This is where A'Lelia Walker enters, daughter of Madam C.J. Walker, who built the first American female self-made millionaire fortune from haircare products. A'Lelia runs a salon in Harlem called the Dark Tower, named after the County Cullen poem printed on the wall. The Dark Tower is not a consolation prize for being excluded downtown. It is the room where Langston Hughes sits near Zora Neale Hurston, near a white socialite who came uptown because downtown has become boring. The guest list bends at A'Lelia's discretion. The discretion is absolute. A'Lelia also owns Villa Luaro, a 34-room estate in Irvington-on-Hudson, designed by Vertner Tandy, the first African-American licensed architect in New York State. She throws parties there that Emily Post would recognize in structure, the invitation, the calling card, the timed visit, the correct address, and would find entirely outside her chapter headings in execution. The calling card reads as it should. The estate disagrees with the narrative. None of this dissolves the daily arithmetic. You know which entrance to use on which street. You know that a white woman who introduces herself as Mrs. Henry Thompson is performing class, and that you introducing yourself the same way is performing something the room has already decided not to receive. The etiquette books do not have a chapter for this because the etiquette books were not written with the expectation that you were reading them. You are, though. You have been for years. The Harlem Renaissance runs parallel to everything this decade is doing with manners and music and hemlines and cigarette smoke. It has its own fashion columns, its own social columns, its own version of the hostess who stands near the fireplace to signal the visit has concluded. The Crisis magazine, edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, runs photographs of black Americans in formal dress, deliberate, legible, a visual argument conducted at portrait-sitting pace. Every photograph is its own calling card, folded corner and all, left at the door of a country that keeps leaving it on the hall table. You climb the stairs to a salon in Harlem, and the social rules begin to invert as you go up. This is A'Lelia Walker's world, daughter of a self-made fortune, and the room you are entering runs on the codes of an internationally connected black elite. Here the hierarchy that governs the streets outside does not set the terms. White literary guests arrive as visitors to someone else's standards. You move through an evening organized around a different center of gravity, and for these hours the usual map of who defers to whom is folded up and put away. The Dark Tower salon occupied the top 2 floors of 108 West 136th Street, a townhouse A'Lelia Walker had converted for precisely this purpose. She did not call it a living room. She called it a salon, with the full weight of every Parisian association that word carried, and then she made it bigger. Langston Hughes is here. Zora Neale Hurston is here. County Cullen is somewhere near the window. A white publisher from downtown has arrived looking slightly uncertain, which is For once, the correct way to arrive. Alalia moves through a room at her own pace. She is 6 feet tall, dressed at a scale to match, and she crosses the floor with the deliberate unhurry of someone who has never once needed to signal that she belonged. A guest named Reginald, who has been coming for 3 weeks and still doesn't know what to do with his hands, watches her pause beside a side table, adjust a lamp that didn't need adjusting, and move on. The adjustment was not about the lamp. The lamp understood this. The food arrives on real china. The conversation moves between Harlem gossip, African sculpture, the latest Josephine Baker reviews from Paris, and whether a particular poem in the new issue deserved its placement. Nobody is eating carefully. Nobody is performing careful. This is the distinction. Downtown, at a formal dinner, you perform ease. Up here, ease is the baseline and performance is what you leave at the door with your coat. Villa Luaro sits 60 miles north of all this, in Irvington-on-Hudson, a 34-room Italian Renaissance mansion that Madame C.J. Walker, Alelia's mother, had built in 1917 and filled with a pipe organ, silk drapes, and gold-plated fixtures. It was grand, deliberate, and built to be impossible to overlook. Madame Walker died in 1919 and left Alalia the machinery of a beauty empire and the keys to a house that Westchester County had not entirely made its peace with. Alalia used both. The estate hosted weekend gatherings where the guest list included W.E.B. Du Bois, Enrico Caruso, and whoever happened to be extraordinary that season. The house did not apologize for itself. Back in the Harlem townhouse, the evening has a structure, though it's not printed anywhere. You don't receive an agenda. You read the room, which is itself a skill, and the skill looks different here than it does in the etiquette manuals gathering dust on shelves downtown. Emily Post's 700 pages have nothing to say about this room. This room is running on knowledge that was never written down because writing it down would have required explaining it to people it wasn't for. Someone hands you a glass and a copy of a poem typed on a single sheet. A woman near the fireplace, her name is Dorothea. She wears her hair shingled close, and a bracelet that arrived from Lagos, reads a stanza aloud without being asked. Nobody told her to. Nobody needed to. She finishes, folds the page once, and hands it to the person beside her. The room continues. The bracelet catches the light and doesn't comment on this. And so here we are, at the end of a very full day. You left a calling card with the corner folded just so. You timed your visit to 16 minutes and 30 seconds. You peeled off one glove at dinner and kept it well clear of the table. You applied your rouge in private, in flattering light, until it was completely undetectable, which was the whole point. You danced the foxtrot, only the foxtrot, like a woman of sound judgment and working knees. You said your husband's full name into the telephone because the neighbours were listening, and the neighbours were always listening. They weren't monsters, most of them. They were people trying to follow a decade that changed the rules every 18 months and never once sent a memo. They wanted what most people want, to be seen, to belong, to get through dinner without anyone noticing the glove. You have none of it tonight. No card to fold, a telephone nobody shares, a hat that is entirely optional. So let your shoulders drop. Let the rules stay behind in 1923. Let your hands rest exactly where they like. Sleep well.